welcome to another talk in our Caregiving Essentials webinar series. My name is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the McMaster Continuing Education, I'd like to thank you for joining us to hear from two wonderful guests from the Canadian Centre for Canadian Excellence, otherwise known as CCCE, a program of the Azrieli Foundation. Today, they will be discussing Canada's National Caregiving Strategy, a very important policy that many of us who watch these programs regularly, really are interested in because we're all caregivers. Before I begin, as always, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which this webinar is taking place, McMaster University, we recognize and acknowledge that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our host, as always, Donna Thomson. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is author of two best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. She also facilitates the free online courses for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials, and she is the co-designer of the Creating Caregiver-Friendly Workplaces and the co-designer and co-director of the Family Engagement and Research Program, all of which are offered at McMaster. And we're so excited to have two speakers today from, as I mentioned, the CCCE, otherwise known as the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. We have James Janeiro and Liv Mendelsohn. Liv is the Executive Director and James is the Director of Policy and Government Relations. Just a little bit of background on the two of our speakers. As the Executive Director, Liv leads innovation, research, policy, and program initiatives to support Canada's caregivers and care providers, all of which are included in our webinar today. And we have James, who is a public policy and advocacy professional with over a decade of experience in politics, policy, and government relations. And as the Director of Policy and Government Relations, he leads an ambitious national and pan-Canadian advocacy and policy development agenda focused on substantive and practical reform, which is what we need. So thank you both, James and Liv, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Donna, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine, and welcome, Liv and James. I am so delighted to be here because, excuse me, we're in the middle of an election, and this is a very important election for Canadians. Tariffs are front and center in all of our minds, but our experience, our shared experience that brings us all together today feels just as urgent. And I'm hoping that we'll learn what the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence is doing to advance caregiving as a primary issue of public policy in this election and in our country. And what we as individual caregivers can do to support it. So, Liv, I'm going to hand the mic to you, so to speak, because you're going to give us a good introduction to what the center is, what its aspirations are, and then we'll come back to you at the end as well to find out how can we all get involved. After you, James will take us through the policy side. So at first, Liv, over to you.
Thank you, Donna. I'm delighted to be here today. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list and lots of new names as well. First and foremost, I'm a caregiver and a care recipient. I have been a caregiver since I was about 8 years old, caring for my grandmother who lived with us. I continue to care for lots of folks in my family and my wider circle, including my dad. And as someone with a disability, I've also been a care recipient. And the mission of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, which is to make Canada the best place to give and receive care, is very, very personal for our whole team. And we are thrilled to have the privilege of really being a convener, bringing together the aging, disability, and healthcare sectors to unite around care issues. We really believe that no matter what pathway brings you to care, we have a lot in common when we are caregiving. So through our embedding within the Azrieli Foundation, we're a funder. We support lots of programming, mental health supports, convenings around caregiving. As I said, our goal is to really build a care movement in Canada and to convene everyone together. And you can find out about our upcoming November summit as well. We'll share that information with you. And we also do a great deal of policy development and advocacy. And if you want to start the slides, Christine, we'll talk a little bit about that work. We have spoken with many, many, many thousands of caregivers and care providers across the country. We also support and advocate for care providers, those frontline folks, PSWs, home health aides, disability support workers who do the work of paid caregiving, along with our family friend, chosen family, neighbor caregivers who are the base of our work. So next slide, please, if you don't mind. So why a national caregiving strategy? Our contention is this. It is our role to support caregivers now, today, with mental health supports, with all sorts of programming and our provincial partners, but also not just to fill the gaps in a bit of a broken system today, but to really work to build a better system. So that is where our advocacy work comes in. We know, and all of you know from personal experience, that the status quo for caregivers in Canada is not working. We are not getting the supports that we need. 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver today. Half of us will give care in our lifetimes, and half of women are already caregivers right now. This is a huge number of Canadians. This issue affects every Canadian family, and we really deserve to have better conditions for care. So caregiving is meaningful to us, and as we'll discuss, it's also very important and invaluable to the Canadian economy. Without caregivers, very few of us would be able to go and do the work that we do. Next slide, please. So caregivers need help. We heard that loud and clear. That's, again, no surprise to you, but we did our national caregiving survey, the first national caregiving survey of about 3,500 caregivers across the country. And we heard loud and clear that caregivers are struggling with mental health, with financial health, with physical health, and that we know that when caregivers are struggling, the people we support are not doing well. And the health outcomes for the people that we are supporting are much less good when caregivers are struggling. So we know that caregivers are really struggling financially in this country right now. We know that caregivers are juggling work and care, and that the average caregiver is providing an average of 30 hours of unpaid care, or almost a second full-time job. That struggle is difficult. We're, hearing from caregivers who are trying to decide between paying the rent, paying for medication, paying for incontinence supplies and nutritional supports, and all of those things that we have to pay for out of pocket at about $1,000 a month for caregivers, and being able to put food on the table. And that's not an acceptable situation. And we know that from our survey that about 80% of paid care providers have thought about leaving the field in the last year because the conditions that they're working in, the undervaluing and underpaying, are also very difficult. So add that together with Canada's demographics of, thankfully, people with disabilities and with complex needs living longer and better lives and needing care for longer, and our aging demographics, we really have a bit of a perfect storm for care. Next slide, please. So one of the things we've been working on for some time now is the notion of a national caregiving strategy. And in budget 2024, the federal government committed to developing a national caregiving strategy, and James will be speaking a little bit more about that process. Next slide, please. And James, I'm going to turn it to you to talk a little bit about why a federal strategy when we know that healthcare is provincial, mostly.
Sure. Thanks, Liv, and good afternoon, everybody. James Janeiro here. Like Liv, in addition to doing this professionally, I've been a caregiver on and off my whole life. Mostly these days for my grandmother, with whom I've spoken to twice already today for various things that she's having issues with this morning, but such is the life of caregivers. On the policy front, though, it is a very good question to ask us why we decided to focus our efforts on the feds rather than provincial order of government, knowing full well that large swaths of this, like healthcare, like social care, and respite, home care, etc., a lot of that live in the provincial order of government. The simple reason is that the federal government is the only order of government in the country that's able to touch everybody at once. We figured let's start federal so we could have maximum impact with our initial efforts out of the gate. Just as a large swath of this is covered by the provinces, indeed, a large swath of this is covered by the feds as well, and I'll get into more detail about that, excuse me, in just a few slides. So there is a lot of this issue does live within the power of the federal government. So if you take that large mandate that the feds have to impact all of our lives and combine that with the role that they actually do have to play in the lives of caregivers every day, it seemed like a logical place for us to start our work with the provinces coming. So I always say we're putting the provinces on notice. We've started our provincial work in a couple of provinces, but we've been focusing our efforts on the feds, which has resulted in, as Liv said, that commitment from the feds, as well as our strategy, which we're about to talk about in just a few moments. We're also today literally in the middle of a very unique electoral moment. More to come on this later on in our presentation, but this is another advantage of starting with the feds. In one election, we can have a lot of impact that will hopefully shape the future of care in Canada. Back to you, Liv.
Thanks, James. And we're going to move to the next slide. So we just wanted to share with you how this strategy came together, because this strategy really came together with and because of you. And in case of this webinar, I can see some some names of people who particularly put their hands up and contributed. So thank you to all of you and to Donna for bringing us all together. First and foremost, co-design. We really know that the policy ideas that are going to solve the problems for caregivers in this country are going to come from caregivers. And we wanted not just to listen and not just to reflect back, but actually really to work together and design together. Practicality, these have to be doable policy ideas. They have to be things that are possible and doable. Urgency, this cannot be a process and could not be a process. This process took us several months, about half a year, but this couldn't be a process that took 3 to 5 years to come to. We really need a strategy now. So urgency, broad application in lots of areas, which we'll talk about. Inclusion and the understanding that all voices need to be at the table, and the table needs to be built in an accessible way so that all voices can join. We really focused on quality of life for caregivers, care providers, and care recipients. As James said, focus on the federal government and an acknowledgement, and you'll see throughout the strategy, if you take a deep dive and read either the executive summary or the strategy, this is just the beginning. We know there is so much more to do, but this is a starting point, and we think a really good starting point. Next slide. So we brought together lots and lots and lots of people as part of our co-design process. We had a care champions table of aging, disability, healthcare leaders, and lived experience leaders. And of course, some people are both. Consultations at conferences, gatherings, and other convenings in all of those sectors and in other sectors. Virtual and in-person consultations with lots and lots of groups, from diabetes and cancer to Inclusion Canada to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's societies, lots and lots and lots of groups. Regional discussions through our provincial caregiving organizations. An online forum, because we know not everybody likes to speak up in a group setting or even one-on-one. And consultations with our own tables. So our Caregivers Advisory Network, our Care Provider Fellows, our Young Caregivers Roundtable, our Military and Veteran Caregiver Community, and our Working Caregivers Steering Committee. So lots of thought from lots of different arenas went into this process. Next slide, please. So a flavor of what that looked like here, James and I traipsing across the country in just about every region of this country. We attended 31 and held 31 convenings. We had 44 consultation meetings, and over 1,500 of the online forms were filled out in English and in French. So thank you to all of you who participated and contributed. Some of the best, like I said, some of the best ideas came from people talking about, their experience with CPP or EI, or flagging for us, the ways in which they felt excluded from existing benefit programs or existing supports. That's what we needed to hear. Next slide, please. So what's in it? This is where I turn it over to James. This is his favorite thing to talk about. So over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Liv. So here we go, folks. I'm going to do my best to do this fairly expeditiously so that we can leave plenty of time for questions, but there is a lot in here. So next slide, please. Our strategy is broken down into 5 overarching pillars, and I'll go through them one by one. There's a lot within each of them, so I'll direct you if you would like to know more about the specifics, or you'd like to read the document itself. This is it right here, National Caregiving Strategy for Canada. It's posted online, both an executive summary as well as the full document, as well as a sort of a trifold brochure type document that hits the high points of it. And perhaps Donna, in the follow-up email after today's session, we can circulate the links to those documents as well, if folks want to have a closer look at it. But I'm going to walk us through one by one the five pillars and hit some of the policy high points within each pillar. So next slide, please. First up, pillar 1 is around improving supports, programs, and services for caregivers. First chunk of that is financial supports. This one is our survey told us loud and clear that this is an urgently necessary policy that needs to be considered, starting with the Canada Caregiver Credit. Now, the federal government committed to making the Canada Caregiver Credit, which already exists, to converting it from a non-refundable to a refundable tax credit, which is to say, converting it from a tax credit that reduces your tax bill at the end of the fiscal year into a tax credit that puts money in your pocket when you file your taxes. This commitment has been on the books since the 21 election in the Liberal platform. It was also in the mandate letter written from the Prime Minister to the Minister of Finance. It has yet to be done. And our 2 asks to the feds from the very beginning, since we've been doing this federal advocacy, has been to commit to developing a national caregiving strategy and to do this change to the Canada Caregiver Credit. Our contention is that this is a fairly easy technical fix, that yes, it costs a bit of money, but all good things do when you're supporting people, really, and that it would have the immediate morning after effect of putting some cash in the pockets of the caregivers who need it the most. So we've put that in the window for front and center. Second is around an idea around a caregiver allowance or caregiver benefit, depending on how you want to talk about it. This exists already in 3 provinces in Canada, in PEI, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, and there's a 4th one on the way in New Brunswick. So our colleagues out in the Atlantic part of the country are already living in a world where they have access to a caregiver allowance, however imperfect it may be, but it does exist. And our suggestion to the feds is that we pursue this at the national order of government as well, to the tune of about $600 a month, targeted at high-intensity caregivers, and that it be phased out at a fairly high income range, so that in recognition of the fact that even caregivers who are on paper appear to be doing decently well in terms of their household finances and income coming into the house, the costs of being a caregiver are quite high. And often caregivers are working less than they otherwise would because of their care responsibilities, or both at the same time. So in recognition of that, we thought, let's make the phase a little bit higher so that people who appear on paper to be doing decently well have a bit of support given those 2 conditions that they likely find themselves in. This is also modeled on the Canada Child Benefit, which already exists. So same sort of idea there. A third one here is around public care insurance. So this is a big idea, and this is a big and kind of expansive or a big approach to expand our social safety net here. This one's quite ambitious. It exists in a few jurisdictions around the world already, in South Korea, in Japan, in Germany, even down south of us in Washington State, there's a version of this as well, where basically, like every other insurance program, you pay your insurance payments every month, every couple of months, whatever your schedule may be. And then when you need it, you draw on the services of your insurance provider. For many of us, it's things like auto insurance, home insurance, etc. In a world where public care insurance exists, if you reach a point in your life where you need care or somebody you love needs care, you'd be able to draw on that public care insurance scheme to pay for the care that you would need. Our contention here is not only that it should exist, but that it be public, that it should not be a product that can be purchased exclusively on the private market, but rather more along the lines of our provincial healthcare systems, which are all insurance-based, and funded through a combination of individual contributions, workplace contributions, and government contributions to make the economics of this idea work. This is a big one. We're not saying do it today. We're saying let's look at this as a way to solve the care crisis that we're living through today and is not far down the horizon. We also heard loud and clear that caregivers need help through targeted programs and services, starting with mental health, and that caregivers need access to mental health services that are trauma-informed, high quality, and easily accessible. Not the sort of handoffs that happen now where a referral is a business card passed across the desk, but rather an easy-to-access mental health system that's there for caregivers when they need it. Now, we also heard loud and clear in this bucket around the need for respite and home care services. More on this later on, but this does largely live within the provincial order of government. We have, however, found an interlocking place where the feds have a role to play in this particular area as well. Next slide, please. So on to pillar 2, which is around supporting caregivers to balance their work responsibilities and their care responsibilities and or their educational responsibilities, i.e. completing their schooling, with their care responsibilities. Starting with making leaves and benefits work for working caregivers. This requires comprehensive and serious reform to our employment insurance system. Now, a caveat off the bat, our entire economy is not covered by EI. In fact, a growing number of workers in Canada are not covered by our EI system. That is a problem. That is a long-standing public policy problem that governments of all stripes in the last 50 or so years have committed to changing and made some progress back and forth. Our contention here is not that we're going to solve the overall EI problem with our National Caregiving Strategy, but rather for those workers who are still covered by EI, which is a large chunk of our working population. For that chunk of the economy, we can use the power of EI to create better leaves and benefits for workers. In particular, we're suggesting the creation of caregiving leave within EI of up to about 50 weeks that would take the logic that already exists around palliative care, end of life, and cancer care currently within EI, and expanded beyond end of life and risk of death to all caregivers who might need to avail themselves of some paid time outside of work, up to 50 weeks, with the additional option for 6 extra weeks for bereavement, usually at the end of a leave, because the way it works right now, it's pretty much automatic. If the person you're supporting passes away, your benefits end fairly soon thereafter. We don't think that's fair. So our suggestion is, if you're going to do this, let's also add in some extra time around bereavement to recognize how difficult a time that is in somebody's life. There's a lot of work to be done to align this with the provinces, because the feds govern the money side of this, let's say, the benefits that are paid by EI, but the job protection part of this lives within the realm of, almost exclusively within the realm of the provinces. So there's work to be done to bring them on board with this. We also suggest letting more of the medical professions deal with the paperwork underneath this, eliminating some of the bureaucracy underneath it, like the 1-week waiting period, and that we need to collectively come up with a solution that covers workers outside of EI. Moving on to providing caregivers with financial security through work and school. I'll start briefly with CPP reform. This is a nubbly one. It's a technical one, but the potential for enormous impact, where caregivers today, who our data says take on the high end tend to take about 5 years out of the labor market to provide care to somebody else, if not more. Of course, there are many people who take a lot more, but our research shows that that's a good number in there. When it comes to that, our suggestion is that when you retire, that the accountants behind CPP do some math and apply your average earnings to those 5 years. The way it works today is that when you retire, if you have had years of little to no income for one reason or another, including due to caregiving, they're treated as zero, which reduces your the payments that you receive from the Canada Pension Plan for the rest of your life. In effect, punishing you for being a caregiver after you retire for the rest of your life. This disproportionately hurts women who start off on the back foot already around their access to CPP because of lower earnings over the course of their career, but also because women are the ones who tend to take more time out of work to be caregivers. That the data tells us very clear. Men and women are both caregivers, but in terms of that long duration caregiving, that tends to fall onto women. So there's a kind of a gender punishment to this as well. If we enact this reform, your average earnings over the course of your years of work would be applied to those 5 years. And in the math that governs what payments you would receive for the rest of your life, it would be, as though you had earned that salary for those years that you were a caregiver. In effect, correcting this problem of punishing you for having been a caregiver for some time out of the labor market. Last thing I'll say here is in a nod to young caregivers who tend to be the ones completing their education, it's important to make it possible for caregivers to take some time away from school to do what they need to do for their loved ones without punishing them in the realm of the federal component of student loans. Right, so making it possible to defer payment or a step back from the federal portion of your student loans, not accruing interest, not being punished for it, just by putting up your hand and saying, "I need to take some time away in order to be a caregiver, and I'll be back." So that's another component that lives within the federal area of jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Still in the realm of supporting caregivers and work and education, most of the labor market is governed by the provinces, but a chunk of it is regulated by the feds. Tends to be large employers in sectors covering provincial boundaries, like, for example, telecom, travel, the railroads, the post office, and so on and so forth, banking. A lot of these big sectors in our economy are governed by the feds. For them, we say, let's take advantage of that and adjust federal workplace regulations so that workers in federally regulated sectors receive 5 paid care days, modeled on what our friends across the pond receive in the UK, where they get 5 unpaid care days for folks in the British economy. We're saying let's one-up them. Let's take the 5 days, but let's make them paid days. So you have access to those days specifically for the purpose of care. Today, often people use their vacation days or their sick days in order to take mom to an MRI appointment or their son to an assessment, something like that. That's not fair because you need that time. You need that time when you're sick, and you need that time to rest when you accrue your vacation. All of us have care responsibilities that need to be addressed, often during the workday, because that's when the medical system is at its peak. That's when therapists are working, so on and so forth. So let's recognize that and give workers these 5 paid days where they can take them in half-day increments, if they'd like, to do what they need to do for the people they love. I'll move on to the next slide in the interest of time. Thank you. On to Pillar 3, support for recipients of care. When we talk to caregivers, they tell us that the single best thing you can do for a caregiver is to support the person for whom they're providing care. The second best thing you can do is to support the caregiver. At CCCE, we believe we can do both. We are a large and generous and rich country. We're a G7 economy. We should be able to support both the caregivers as well as the people for whom they're providing care, be it folks near the end of life or seniors or people with disabilities. So there are things we can do in that realm, starting with the disability tax credit, which, if you've ever tried to access it, is a Kafkaesque quagmire of nonsense. And that's the polite way of describing it. It is hard to get in the door. It's hard to get an answer back. And there are silly things in there that, for example, make a friend of mine missing a leg have to reapply for his disability tax credit every couple of years, as if his leg will grow back and the CRA needs proof that he's still missing a limb. This can all be fixed. So our suggestion is that we take the disability tax credit and make it better by expanding eligibility to a wider definition of disability, waiving reapplication requirements in nearly all cases, like my friend missing a leg, for example, and having proper crosswalks from child's benefits to adult benefits and back and forth as well, so that when you're in for one, for example, the child disability benefit, you can automatically convert that into the disability tax credit easily for the rest of that person's life. We're also suggesting auto-enrollment in the Registered Disability Savings Plan. In that same breath, there are improvements we can make to the RDSPs, like auto-enrollment, I just said, raising the contribution age to a higher age that better reflects the blessed time in which we're living around people with disabilities living longer and healthier lives, reducing the waiting period in order to access the government-sponsored funds, doubling the contribution limit, and also allowing siblings to hold RDSPs on behalf of their siblings. Today, it's mostly limited to parents and spouses. Next slide, please. The Canada Disability Benefit is this other sort of big elephant in the room here. It is about to exist. The payments, if all continues as the law has been written, the payments will start flowing shortly. The federal government released the regulations underpinning the Canada Disability Benefit, I think about a month and a half, 2 months ago. The legislation passed quite some time ago. So this is on the horizon. But the Canada Disability Benefit as it stands today, as it's designed, is wholly insufficient to meet the moment. So our suggestion is that it be raised to a minimum of $12,000 a year, that it be indexed and non-taxable, so you don't pay taxes on your Canada Disability Benefit payments, and that the provinces across the country commit to no provincial clawbacks. This is a big one. We could do 3 hours on just this. I will refrain from subjecting you to that. But basically, the issue here is that if you are currently receiving disability benefits from a provincial support program like ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program in Ontario, the way things are written today, once the Canada Disability Benefit starts flowing, that amount could be clawed back from your provincial benefits. We don't think that's fair. We think at a bare minimum, people with disabilities should be able to receive the full benefit of the CDB and make sure that their benefits paid out to them are not clawed back for their provincial payments. Lastly here, very quickly to say, there's a lot to be done within the medical expenses tax credit that exists already today. Having just completed my taxes, I just went through this, and in the hour-long meeting that I had with my accountant, about a third of it was spent talking about this, because if you've got medical expenses, especially if you're filing on somebody else's behalf, it's fairly opaque and it's pretty silly around what's counted and what isn't and at what rate. So our suggestion here is let's take all of this, make it more generous, make it easy to access, simplify the claims, and make it more accessible for lower income people so that they can receive some of the cash they spend over the course of the year on medical expenses back through the existing tax credit regime. Next slide, please. Now, onto the care provider workforce. As Liv said earlier, our mandate at CCCE covers both paid and unpaid care, caregivers as well as care providers. Here we're saying at a bare minimum, let's recognize the importance and the value that care providers bring to the table, and let's implement a $25 minimum wage for care providers across the country. This is built on a standing federal commitment to a $25 minimum wage for personal support workers that was made during the pandemic. It has started to be implemented through a variety of different mechanisms in some parts of the country, and wages have started to tick up in some provinces, but it is limited specifically to personal support workers. Our suggestion here is take that same logic of the $25 minimum wage and expand it to other other care providers, like, for example, direct support professionals who support kids and adults with disabilities to live in the community. Around the workforce stabilization part of this, there's a lot to be done on wages, but also on the pipeline of work and the conditions of work. On the issue of making sure that we have enough care providers, our contention is that it's important to improve the pathways to permanent residency for care providers who come to Canada to practice their skilled labor. There's a pilot that already exists. There's been some recent media around how it's not working very well for a litany of reasons. Our suggestion, in addition to fixing it, is to expand that pilot, make it permanent, dramatically reduce the processing time, and to also, in another vein, use the globally recognized logic of the point system that underpins our immigration system to get more care providers into Canada to be care providers. Our point system is pretty good at getting doctors, lawyers, and engineers to Canada. Unfortunately, they get here, their credentials are not recognized, and they're parked into a credential recognition process that takes a long time. That logic, though, is sound. So our suggestion is, if you're a care provider in another country, let's reward you for your skills, because this is skilled labor. This is not easy work. This is skilled labor that deserves to be recognized as such. If you are a credentialed care provider in another country, you should get those points if you want to come to Canada so that you can get here and continue practicing your career on our shores. We desperately need more and more care providers every day. Next slide, please. So lastly, around government leadership and recognition, Canadian history has also shown that when the feds start to tackle an issue, the provinces catch up pretty quickly. But that requires federal leadership, that the feds take a big, bold step into this policy area, starting with acknowledging that it's a priority. We need legislation saying that a national caregiving strategy needs to exist, and to have some standing advisory capacity in there within the bounds of the federal government, so that it's permanent and not ad hoc the way it's done right now. We're also suggesting that the other part of federal leadership here is that the feds use their purchasing power in healthcare through the provincial health accords that get renegotiated every few years to prioritize caregiving at the provincial order of government in the next round of negotiations. So in other words, let's say you're living in Ontario, our next federal health accord is up for negotiation in, I believe, 3.5 years, if I remember correctly. Our suggestion is, let's use that opportunity to put caregiving at the top of that list, or near the top of that list, so that the feds can use their spending power to buy change for caregivers in the form of our suggestions: respite, home care, check-ins and assessments for caregivers, using that federal influence on how healthcare dollars are spent. There's also a lot of research to be done around this in terms of better public policy going forward. We're blessed to have a large and comprehensive network of national research bodies that already exists. Let's tap into them and put caregiving on the research agenda for these research institutions. Next slide, please. Very quickly here, part of federal leadership is around recognizing that our current and former veteran members of the Canadian Forces need our help. Being a caregiver in Canada, as we all know, is not easy. Being a military and veteran caregiver in Canada comes with its own set of challenges. A unique thing about this particular population, though, is that most of their lives is governed exclusively and sort of planned and situated by the federal government. This is one population that they can focus on and really make a big difference. We need more members in the forces, not fewer, and they need our help. So there's some work to be done here. I won't spend too long on it, other than to say this is becoming a priority for us. We've done some dedicated research and now some dedicated policy work around this, in particular around interoperability between the forces and provincial systems like the healthcare systems and social care systems like autism services. But all of this needs to be made simpler and easier for members of the forces and veterans and their families, because they need our help and they deserve it. They put their lives on the line for for king and country, and the least we can do is help them out in this regard. Next slide, please. So we are in the middle of a unique electoral moment now, folks. We are in the middle of a federal election. We are quite literally, I think, in the middle of the campaign. In a moment, Liv will talk to you about what you can do to take up this mantle and insert your voice into this debate. But I want to implore you to really think critically about what we've talked about today. If you like what you've heard and you believe that caregiving is the next frontier of public policy in Canada, and that we as caregivers deserve better from our federal leaders, take your opportunity and keep this in mind as you walk to the ballot box, either in the advanced polls or on Election Day, April 28th. And how you can do that? Well, Liv, over to you.
Yes, next slide, please. So we'll before we jump into questions, because I see there are lots, which is wonderful, we'll leave you with this. As I said, we're building a care movement, and this election and the first 100 days of the new government, whoever that will be, is a key time for us to show the strength of the care movement in Canada. We have a very simple and easy way for you to join our Act on Care campaign. You can go to canadiancaregiving.org/act. And it will send a letter or an email to all of the candidates in your riding, all the federal policy leaders, sharing with them the highlights of the care strategy and the need to focus on care. The other thing we have for you, if you go to our website, is a toolkit for when those candidates come knocking on your door. As if your neighborhood is like mine, you've had quite a lot of that lately. Some key questions to ask about how they will prioritize care across every single party. So join us, Act on Care, join the campaign. You can post about it, you can share it with your friends and social media. We really want to make sure we've had more than, I think, 12,000 people signed so far. And we want to get a nice groundswell across the country. So I'm going to turn it back to Donna to help us field all of your wonderful questions.
Thank you so much. Well, every time I hear you guys present on the national strategy, I am filled with optimism for the future of Canada. I really am. I think this is the best hope that we have as Canadian caregivers for a better future. We do have a lot of questions, and I'll start with some of the simpler ones to address, I think, and also in the order that they came in. So the first question, I think, James, for you, will the caregiver credit, once it becomes refundable, be available to all caregivers, regardless of the care recipient income?
Yes, that's the way we position this. Not only broad in that regard, but also broad based on what makes you a caregiver. So, whether it be disability, aging, chronic disability, lifelong disability, and so on. So, needs to be broadened and scaled in both regards.
Okay, and another question, somewhat related, under the CPP reform, would there be a top up or double that 5-year of low/no income if you happen to be a full-time unpaid caregiver for multiple family members? For example, people are caring for father, mother, spouse over a 10-year period of time. Are these incrementally increased depending on the number of people you're looking after and time also?
That's a very good idea. I'll say not the way we've designed it so far. It's cut off at 5, or cut off, I should say. It's suggested to be at 5. In order to recognize a data point from our survey that when we asked caregivers who took time out of the labor market, how long did you take? Many of them said 5 years, and very few said after that. So a lot more than that, I should say. So it is worth considering this particular point. Also, our thinking here was that there already exist provisions within CPP and EI, within CPP, to discount more years of your potential earning years from your overall calculation. So the way we're positioning this is that you've got 5 years of caregiving years that would be automatically have your average earnings applied. And if there are more years outside the labor market on top of that, which currently top out at, I believe, 7 or 8 years, I think it's 8, then you can apply the rest of those years to your time that you were a caregiver as well. So this is meant to ring fence, really, 5 years of caregiving, but I'm totally open to having a conversation around stacking that or expanding that as needed, or even on a case-by-case basis for people who are in that more high-intensity caregiver situation.
Hmm. Okay, that's very interesting to me, someone who took 23 or no more than that, probably 25 years out of the workforce
Yeah.
to give care intensively. And those were my peak
Peak years,
earnings.
always.
Yeah. So here's another question. When you refer to the 5 days of paid caregiving leave, James, in what interval is that per year?
Year, yes, over the calendar year.
Over the calendar year. Okay, great. Another question that many of our listeners today had was when you mentioned $25 an hour for frontline paid caregivers, how are you assessing that and thinking about the pathway to immigration as
Mhm.
well? Would people who in the strategy as it's being put forward, would that only include people with a qualification such as a personal support worker qualification? Or can anyone who commits to working as a frontline caregiver, say, and becomes trained on the job, would they also fall under this umbrella?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It would be in our minds, it would be by employer rather than individual qualification or having a certification or not. So if you're, let's use Community Living Ottawa as an example,
Mhm.
right? So if you are an employee of Community Living Ottawa, some of your colleagues will have certifications from one of the college programs, others will not. Those who do not will receive generally more on the ground workplace training in order to be able to perform similar or the same functions. If from the federal government's perspective, it would be your employment by that agency that would determine you being covered by the $25. The feds should not, in our view, should not get into the business of saying this qualification, that qualification, but not this, that, or the other, because this sector is so complex. There's so many different programs, micro credentials, certifications, on the job training programs, whatever. Rather, it's that connection with the employer that should be the interface. And ultimately, that's where the public funds flow as well in terms of paying the frontline workers. It goes theoretically from the feds to the province, from the province down to the contract holder, like in this case, Community Living Ottawa. So it's a complicated way of answering your question, but I hope it gets to the point there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I wonder if you can give us an idea, what is the difference between the care insurance proposal that you put forward in the strategy and long-term care insurance that one can buy from private insurance providers?
Another great question. So, in our analysis of current insurance products that you can buy that are proxies for this, they tend to be pretty expensive and they're restrictive. So, if you've got pre existing conditions or if you're closer to an actuarially significant age of needing long term care, it's either much more expensive for you or they won't sell it to you at all. So that's one key difference. The other key difference is that those are private products that are available for purchase. Our suggestion is that this be publicly available insurance in the style of OHIP. What most people in Ontario don't realize is that our whole healthcare system is predicated on an insurance scheme, right? The only difference is that it's publicly funded and workplace funded insurance rather than Sun Life, Manulife, whatever it might be. It's the same logic. Just the entity behind the insurance scheme is the government rather than a private corporation. So those are the key differences: is a broader application for more people, and also that it be publicly sponsored and publicly funded. In this case, though, through a combination of what the Europeans call social contribution. So relatively equal mix of workplace, individual, and government sponsorship.
Mhm. Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. And I wonder if that uh, difference, if we saw this, a private insurance as you've described it, roll out in Canada, would that protect family caregivers in a situation where they become terminated from all extended health benefits if their loved one, who is the insured individual, dies? That's another question that came in.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think for this to work and to achieve the policy objective that we wanted to achieve, which is to have an established, predictable vehicle to pay for care for everybody who needs it for the long term, I think you'd have to build in that kind of flexibility. So it's not tied directly to your workplace. For example, if you lose your job in Ontario, you don't lose OHIP coverage. You continue to have OHIP coverage. The only thing that's missing is that the government is sponsoring your employer contribution as it is, rather than you paying it out of pocket, or not out of pocket scheme, rather than your employer paying it on your behalf. So you would need to have that kind of really universal coverage with enough give in the system so that yes, your employer is paying a contribution, but your eligibility for it should not hinge on you having an employer who's making that contribution for you.
Okay. Thanks, James. And, we've had, we're not going to be able, unfortunately, to get to all of the questions, but we had a lot coming in from people who registered for this webinar, and they were submitted with their applications to attend today. One of the questions was, can a neighbor or a friend access the proposed benefits, the caregiver benefits? And this refers back to, Liv, at the beginning of the presentation, you alluded to the friend caregiver. As we know, for example, in the LGBTQ plus community,
Yes.
there's so much caregiving going on between people who are not blood relations. And so, how does one self-declare as a caregiver to access the National Caregiver Benefit, for example, or any of the other benefits that you've described as that fall under the strategy? How is that going to be assessed?
If you look at eligibility, other jurisdictions have the care recipient designate who their primary caregiver is. So it could be a child, a parent, a spouse, but it could be a chosen family, a neighbor. There are lots of people we know in our lives who make up that web of care. So that would be something that would be designated in some jurisdictions. It's designated by the care recipient. In others, it's designated by the care recipient in consort with some kind of primary care provider. There are lots of ways to do this. It shouldn't be exclusionary. We know there are lots of people involved in care. And similarly, some of the provisions we talk about in the strategy, like mental health supports for caregivers, those have to be broad enough to touch the people who are doing the care. It's not helpful. We often hear stories about how the person listed on the electronic medical record as the emergency contact is often not actually the caregiver, and that there needs to be recognition of who actually is doing that care coordination, support, navigation, all of those pieces. So it's not a simple matter of, well, choose a blood relative or choose who's listed on the EMR. Like everything with care, it requires some nuance and some conversation.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of questions coming in regarding the national affordability of the
Yes.
national strategy. And I wonder if you can, either of you or both, weigh in a little bit on what you think. I think you've made a great case for investing in care. So we've heard that loud and clear. But is this going to actually save us money? What is the financial case for affordability for this strategy?
Well, I will let James get into the costing of everything because that's another of his favorite topics. But I will say, first of all, we can't afford not to. The demographic, shifts in this country are the imperative. We simply can't afford not to. And we know that in terms of the economy, we are leaving so much productivity on the table in terms of people who cannot work to their full potential because they're providing care. So there are cost savings when you look at home care versus long-term care. There are cost savings across the board. But as a whole package, it's simply not sustainable for us to continue to do things this way. We will start to see more and more people surrendering their loved one at the ER, whether they're, dealing with someone with a disability or an aging parent or what have you. Our system is not working with the entire downloading onto caregivers. James, I'll let you jump into the numbers because I know you're chomping at the bit.
I am indeed. So I'll just add to that particularly in the unique times, shall we say, in which we live, we can't afford to leave a giant chunk of productive capacity off the table. If indeed these headwinds that are battering us are going to turn into a full-fledged storm, in order to reach that kind of full, everyone firing on all cylinders version of our Canadian economy, in addition to interprovincial trade barriers, in addition to dealing with trade relationships with Europe, with Asia, with other parts of the world, we also need to have everybody in the country working as hard and as productively as they can. And that includes the 1 in 4 Canadians today who are caregivers, leaving lots of value on the table. On the specifics around numbers, for example, I'll give you one. So our costing of the Canada Caregiver Benefit, that conversion, excuse me, is in the tens of millions of dollars. So to us, that sounds like a lot of money. When you're talking about the national order of government, that's not a lot of money. And it has the knock-on effect of supporting people in their pockets the next day. The unique thing about interventions that support caregivers is that it's a very efficient investment, because you're not only supporting that person, you're supporting that person and the person they're supporting at the same time. So in that realm of, we can't afford not to, if you're talking about, say, just to pick on one example, let's call it roughly $80 million investment in the Canada Caregiver Credit, that is a very well spent $80 million, because it's a relatively small number to begin with. It unlocks a lot of support at the ground level, and it makes it possible for somebody with not a ton of money, but a little bit of money, to make better choices about where they can allocate their resources throughout the month. So there's a knock-on benefit to all of this stuff. It's not just the cash out the door from the public purse, it's also what you're getting for it out the other side.
Okay, thank you. And one quick more question. I know that we're going to end up running just 1 or 2 minutes over, but someone asked in the chat, how can we hope for this plan to be actionable? And what is the timeline? So I just wonder if you could just say a few words about the Caregiving Caucus that is cross-party, that is actually at work to bring this to fruition and supporting it right now in our Parliament.
Sure. Thank you for that plug, Donna. So we pulled together a National Caregiving Caucus from all the parties represented in the House of Commons at dissolution. So based on where we were at the end of March, that has representation from all the parties of parliamentarians. It's about 13 of them now, all committed to making caregiving a national priority. So they are our people on the Hill. They are the ones we call for support. They're the people who back us up when we have a question into government or into a political party. This did not exist a year ago. This is a new and novel thing that we have managed to work very hard with advocates across the country to pull into fruition, in part because the conversation around care today is at a completely different level from where it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. The demographics help, right? More and more people are being touched by this. Our politicians are hearing this at the door. Ergo, they bring it to the House of Commons as part of their work, representing all of us. So that is an indirect plea to you, everyone on this call, to take that logic to its next step, which is when you have candidates at your door asking for your vote during this campaign, ask them about these issues. Use our toolkit. Go out there, find the questions, and have a conversation with them. Go online, do our Act on Care page, as Liv suggested. Take this to its next level of turning it from a conversation that's going to a conversation that's unignorable when you get to political decision making in Ottawa.
Thank you so much. Thank you, James and Liv, for giving us hope. We definitely are on the side of hope today. And over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Liv and James. Wonderful conversation, and thank you to everyone who has been contributing in the chat. As always, it's really lovely to see people sharing, coming up with ideas. So thank you, everyone, for your contributions today. So that is the end of today's webinar, but we do have one more before we conclude the season until we start up again in September. So June 6th, we hope that you will join us. We have a special guest, Canadian playwright Brad Fraser. He is going to do a talk on caregiving in the gay community because, of course, in Canada, we celebrate with greatness Pride Month. So we hope that you will join us then. I think you'll be interested to know that Brad, so not only like he's a playwright, but he has actually written about his experiences as a caregiver in the community to one of his neighbors and her cat. So we'll leave you with that little teaser, and we'll hope that you'll want to join us on June 6th. I think Jen has just put in the chat the link to that, but we'll also include that in the email. And I will confirm with Donna, Liv, and James about all of there was so much great information, all the resources. I'll make sure that we include that in the follow-up email that you'll get in about a week or so. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Liv and James, for taking time out of your day to share with us, Canada's national strategy, caregiving strategy. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Take care, everyone.